Hello, for those of you who haven't met me, I'm Viki Patton. I look after the marketing here at EvaluAgent, and I'm delighted today to be joined by the one, the only Chris Mounts. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. So, yeah, my name's Chris Mounce. I'm the Product Enablement Manager here at EvaluAgent, which really means that I make sure that the platform that it can actually do, what the platform can do actually gets used well by the teams who've taken it on. It's all about recognizing the value.
Amazing. Thanks for that, Chris. So we shan't give you any longer. Let's dive in. This series, we have been talking about AutoQA, but not as it lives necessarily in the platform with the value agent. More those things that surround AutoQA and the things that can kind of really give people headaches. So we've talked about getting business cases signed off. We've talked about what can derail AutoQA. We've talked about what happens when you bring automation in and what that means for teams. And today, we are talking about the nitty gritty, the migration, and Chris, I think this is the thing that can give people nightmares.
Yes, I think so. And I think probably the reason being is that it's more in the technical side, and like QA leads and QA managers typically don't get involved in that. And I think because these are the challenges that come up, they can throw a spanner in the works. So, yeah, I think it's a good one to get into, Vicky.
For sure. Right. So let's cover the first point. Knowing where your data lives. Now, on the surface, this feels like something that should be quite easy, just kind of quite plug and play. Like, I know exactly where everything is. Is that the reality for a lot of people?
Well, technically, yes. I mean, the integrations work as they should work. They'll bring in the data and things, but actually, I had an interesting conversation with one of our technical success managers, Echo, and he gave me some really really interesting insight. The the integration is not where migrations come unstuck. What comes through those integrations, that's sometimes where the challenge is. Because if you think about if the data in that source system is messy, then it's going to land in the platform messy. And that's something that you can't scale that up because the data is unusable. So that was an interesting one for me.
It's not often that they hit like a broken integration. It's often like their own data that's actually causing that problem.
Yeah, yeah, that exactly right. I mean, the connector, the integration, that's doing its job. It just does its job on whatever data you give it. So one of the kind of things to think about is find out where your conversations actually live, because this can catch people out more than probably most things, because plenty of businesses store their interactions in one platform, but actually access it through another and don't realize that there's two separate things. So they point us at the tool that they use every day, and lo and behold, that's not where the data is. So the kind of key thing to think about here is find out the true source system first, and a clean import gets much simpler.
Yeah, again, like that feels like something that we all know, but actually, like it can end up being a more complicated thing. So definitely worth ticking that box. Talk to me about redaction, because this is something that can derail things quite quickly if it's not kind of handled up front.
Yeah, so the redaction is a really good point, because if the conversations contain sensitive things, like card numbers, national insurance numbers, social security numbers, personal data, essentially, configure the redaction so that all of that sensitive stuff is redacted and stripped out before the conversation is stored and analyzed. So do that first, because you don't want to be retrofixing what's already landed in the platform, and all of that sensitive data is sitting there.
Sounds like it would be a real headache to unpick as well. So, what else have we got? Multiple platforms, integrations, redaction. What is the kind of next thing that people need to consider? Because once if you were to import all the data and you haven't redacted things, like what happens then? Like what's the next step, and who has to fix that?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, it's fixable. I mean, it's not the end of the world. If you've got that sensitive information in there, I mean, it can be stripped out. The thing is, though, it's just work that you didn't need to do, and it's going to give you a bit of a headache, and it's just going to add time into your migration. So do it first before you get to that point.
So really, this whole kind of section that we're talking about here is just getting your data nice and clean, nice and ready before we're even like really touching any new platforms.
Yeah, exactly. It's just cleaning up the data because if you've got clean data, when that lands in the platform, it's going to be clean and usable. And the thing to keep in mind is that this is one part of the project that isn't really a QA job. Like as I mentioned earlier, like QA leads don't really have to get involved in integrations and APIs. It's not something that you do on a day-to-day basis, and you shouldn't need to get involved. So getting like the IT team in early and our TSMs, our wonderful team that handle all of that, Echo and Atik, they can work directly with those guys to land the data properly. So they can carry all of that, and you don't have to. Because you shouldn't
Such a
need.
great point. Yeah, that's such a great point to call out, actually, is that one of the things in a lot of migrations is like you don't need to go beyond your remit, just get the right people in the room. Like that headache doesn't just need to be yours, actually. And it's
Yeah,
probably not a headache for the people who know what they're doing. So just involve them
yeah.
early.
And this is the thing. I mean, this is kind of embarrassing. I remember the first time I heard the term API, and I had no clue what it was. And and hopefully I'm not the only person that's ever been in that position. But it just goes to show that stay in your own wheelhouse and let the people that handle all of that let them deal with that, and it makes it much easier.
Sure. Okay. Well, we love a moment where we can delegate, but let's move on. Let's take on to the next step. So, a bit of an evolution of what we were just talking about. Mapping and preparing your data. This is like a layer down. This is like we're now starting to get closer to the new platform. We're talking about things like metadata, agent mapping, bot conversations. Talk to me about this, Chris. Where should we start?
Well, I think the data being there and having landed in the platform, that's not quite the same thing as the data being usable. And this is one that's pretty important. Everything comes into the platform, nothing's broken, but you just can't do anything with it. And one of the reasons for that is that an attribute or segment that data. So you're getting lots of volume, but you just can't do anything with it. So, one of the things to think about is your agent mapping. Get that sorted out again before you pull in the data. Because the way that, if you think about how you log into your telephony platforms, your ticketing systems, etc., usually that's an email address. So chris.mounce@barryagent.com. And that's how most platforms will match up the agent to conversation by the email address. Now, if that login is different, for example, it's CMounce, then that could potentially throw up the conversation as being unmatched. That's when you need to think about how your logins are actually handled and identify essentially that third party ID. Because if you sort that out, your conversations will all land in and they're being matched to the agents automatically, and it's not a headache for you. You can just get going with the next part of that. And that's one that can catch you out.
That's something that can catch people out because it's not something necessarily obvious or easily spotted straight away. Like, why is that?
It's a really interesting thing. I mean, the when you integrate you integrate with your platforms and you bring in those conversations, you kind of almost assume that it'll automatically know who the agent is. But then when you think about it in kind of technical terms, you've got your agent logins for the platform. They've got their own sort of kind of unique identifiers and things like that. And if that isn't matched up in the same way to the conversations, then it's not going to know whose conversation that is. So it seems obvious when you say it out loud, but it's a really common thing that can throw people up. And it's just a case of know how your agents are identified in your source platform. You know that, and then you're sorted when you create your users.
Amazing. 'Cause then you are plug and play once you prepped your data. So, okay, so next thing then, like, why should people do a similar kind of exercise with their metadata?
The metadata, it's a really good point because the metadata is really, really useful because you are able to sort and filter by that metadata. And it could be things like, a VIP status, business category, or channel. And those fields are what your scorecards and your auto scoring rules sort of kind of come off. So you could have hundreds of metadata fields in your source platform, and then we bring all of those through. And the majority of those are no use to you. They don't provide any value to your QA purposes. It's just noise, and you lose value on what those fields can do. So one of the things to do is document the important pieces of metadata so that we can make sure that those are the ones that are going to show up, not 150 other pieces of metadata that mean nothing to you. And it's not something you realize until you see all of that metadata landing in the platform. So again, the integration's done its bit, it's brought everything through, but it just needs to be clean and usable. That's the key.
A lot of this is actually a kind of decision making stage, right? It's just making sure that you're not bringing tons of volume and tons of noise over, and what you're bringing is useful. Because I suppose with AutoQA, what it can do is amplify that at a big scale. So this is a great opportunity to make those decisions and really hone in on what you find valuable and the things that you're looking for.
Exactly, and the other thing to think about as well is interactions that have multiple agents or multi-leg calls. Like if you've got a conversation that passes through three people, then you've kind of got a choice as to how you treat that. Like, do you QA the whole interaction, or just the last agent, or every agent individually? Now, what's interesting is that there's no universally correct answer here, but it's one you need to think about early because that's going to change how you structure and attribute your scoring.
That's quite fundamental actually as well. And there's an elephant in the room here of an agent that we haven't spoken about, which could be an AI agent or a bot.
Yeah, well, we're starting to see the majority of conversations being handled by chatbots, whether that's a kind of logic-based bot or an AI agent. Um, it's important to identify your bot in the same way that you think about identifying your agents. If you don't identify your bot, potentially that could be flagged as a human. So then it gets scored on a human scorecard and it's sat in someone's team average in the KPI reports, or it gets dropped out of the picture entirely. And both of those scenarios, they're wrong. So it's definitely something to think about right at the beginning, rather than having to unpick it like a year down the line when questions are getting asked.
And I don't think anyone later. Okay, so we've got clean data. We've got decisions made. We're getting closer and closer now. Scorecards. Now, I can imagine this would give people a few headaches or nightmares, depending on what we're thinking. And guys, let me just call quickly to the chat because we're approaching halfway. Again, any questions, anything you'd like Chris to dive in deeper at the end, do get them in. Would love to take those towards the end. But Chris, translating and updating scorecards, I imagine there might be a temptation to kind of just lift and shift. And I would suggest that perhaps people don't do that, but tell me why.
Yeah, I mean it's the assumption that can cause the most hassle or the most pain that you can just sort of kind of lift and shift your scorecard. And it doesn't, but that's not a platform limitation. If you think about how you've written a scorecard, it's written for a human reviewer. All of the guidelines are instructions for a human evaluator, and that human evaluator brings context, judgment, and a little bit of instinct to that. You're now handing that to something that's going to do exactly what it's told, very literally, thousands and thousands of times. So it's not so much a translation job, and it's worth putting some time into this because spending time auditing your scorecard is it'll pay off in dividends.
Sure. So it's definitely not something that we would consider a copy and paste job.
Yeah, I mean, it's more like audit the scorecard, before you start to bring it in. And one of the things to call out is relating to the size of a scorecard. Like if you have a scorecard that's got like 100 plus line items, which, I've seen that on more than one occasion. Think about, is there a need for all of those questions? Have most of those just been accumulated over time rather than actually being designed to be in there? And the harder problem usually isn't the actual line item itself. It's the mathematics behind it. Like the kind of common if this then that scenario that people have built into a spreadsheet over the years. That's going to break the moment that it hits a system that is bound by real logic. So audit the scorecard to make sure that it is an easier transfer, rather than all of those complex rules. It's easy for a human to understand, but a logic-based system in that regard, that's where it'll break.
I think with like busy teams and stuff, like when you're actually going through a migration, which is a lot of people are put off by because it feels like a big project and that kind of thing. But the silver lining of it is that it's understood that it is, in fact, a project. This is a good time to audit scorecards. We don't often get that time later on, or you don't necessarily want to retroactively do it. Like now is a really great opportunity to do so.
Oh, totally. Because I mean, you don't audit a scorecard just for fun. It is the ideal time to do it, and one of the ways to approach that is think about your criteria, because ultimately you need to rewrite those. That criteria is prompts, not just a case of copying them across. Because like your team, they'll know the scorecard inside and out, but writing for an AI is genuinely a different skill. Like the line item makes complete sense to a human reviewer, but that'll often score badly as a literal prompt, which can then translate into a system error. But it's typically a prompt error. So translate each one of those line items and then test it. And one thing that's worth calling out, Vicky, is the line item builder tool that we have in the platform. That does a lot of that heavy lifting for you. It will write the prompts, write the guidelines, and then iterate over that. It's a really effective way to translate your line items. And actually, again, just worth calling that out. I did say that you shouldn't just sort of kind of drop it in. There is tools in the platform that lets you drop it in and will translate it. So there's a lot of support there in the platform that's worth mentioning.
Sure, it can give you like best practice feedback and so on. So it's a really great tool. If anyone wants to find out more about our line item builder, you can go ahead and look on our Knowledge Hub on our website, and it's a whole article will tell you all about it. Um, what about like those prompts or line items or things like what have you got an example of where like this doesn't translate as well?
Yeah, do you know, it's typically anything that's subjective. You know, like the kind of classic, was the agent empathetic? You know, a person can, an evaluator can infer that, but the AI, they need to know exactly what it's looking for. And that's where, you know, you need to spend some time thinking, what does empathy mean in the terms of our scoring criteria for the business? And that's your compliance things are absolutely fine because it's a case of did they say it or did they not? But where it's subjective, that's where you'll find that.
And then like one last thing before we move on, because I am conscious of time, but what about like the knowledge bases that people already have and how they can kind of bring that in as part of an auto QA migration? It's often overlooked.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's always going to be like a knowledge base for agents to make sure that they're given the right information, etc. That knowledge base, all of those knowledge articles, the process documents, policy documents, those can be grounded in an evaluation. So you're ultimately scoring it against what your business actually says good looks like, rather than just like a generic idea of it. And that's usually just sitting there. Um, Unused aside from being referred to by agents. So bring that in as well, and enhance your evaluation capability. And it's
Sure,
not a
it
case,
makes
like writing new material. It's all there. It's just a case of getting it into your AutoQA program and scored against it.
it's making that auto QA work even harder. Like all of that information is there. Like why not use it?
Yeah, exactly. Because and it's worth sort of kind of mentioning about what you can't see, and what you know what you can't see when it comes to scoring, because AutoQA can score the evaluation, but it can confirm something that happened outside of that conversation and your knowledge articles and things like that. So if you think about an agent flagging something to a manager or an action being taken in another system, it can't see that. So it's important to know what it can't see and design your criteria around that. So that would be like more of a manual or a blended approach rather than expecting the AI to catch it and then getting it wrong.
Lots to think about. We've been quite technical so far. As we move on, there's something that we haven't really spoken about. And this is the kind of more interpersonal, operational side of managing a migration. So, how do you make it land internally? What are things that people can do?
Yeah, I mean, it's like if you think about everything that we've spoken about so far, it's solvable with like a bit of time and a bit of care. This part isn't really technical at all. Like if you think of this scenario, you flip the switch, hold your auto QA switch, and then your reviewers. they're seeing scores that they don't recognize, and then they decide that the tool is wrong. Now, once that's happened, it's pretty difficult to come back from, because if you think about it, now you're arguing rather than improving something. So it's people don't really reject a tool per se. They reject being handed a number that they don't agree with or they can't account for.
This is like, people accepting a score that they haven't validated, that they don't understand.
Exactly. So, I mean, one of the ways to get around that is let them validate it. Run a proof of concept. Give your prompts get your prompts to a level of accuracy that your teams can actually stand behind. So use a blended approach. Get those evaluations in front of the human to check the AI's work while trust is being built. And I've got to call out, that's not a lack of confidence in the platform. It's kind of how you earn the right to hand it over, which I think is a really good point to make.
There's an element here of just taking people on the journey, isn't there? It's not just your QA team, it's your agents as well.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, agents should be involved in it as, equally as much as the evaluators, because if you get their buy-in, then that's more than half the battle. You lose the agents, then you're going to lose that engagement, and it essentially turns it's you lose credibility in your QA program from that point. And just as I'd mentioned, it is really difficult to bring that back.
Sure. Okay. So how do people kind of stick the landing? How do they kind of commit to it properly? What does a good rollout look like? Do they go all in on AutoQA right from the beginnings? Like turn the switch? Like what do you recommend?
Run it in parallel. Don't switch anything off in terms of your earlier processes, your manual processes. And I think this is probably one of the single most useful things to pull out of this. Keep your manual QA running exactly as it is, and then let auto QA let that test in the background alongside of it. Now that means that there's no gap in the insight that the business is getting, so there's nothing at risk. Meanwhile, you're building the evidence while that old process is still sort of kind of holding the fort, and then you go live because you've proved it, not because you've just committed to turning this fancy new machine on. So it's about taking the time and building that evidence up, and the trust.
Okay. So we've covered a lot in that time. Um, this is a good example, I think, of one of our customers who have kind of gone through this process, like embracing AutoQA, they've had to go through a migration. This is what good looks like. But like, Chris, let's just reiterate some of those points. Like, so not flipping the switch cold, taking people on the journey. Like, talk to me about this customer story.
Yeah, I mean, it just as we had mentioned there, they ran AutoQA in the background alongside that manual process, and they built up their AutoQA scorecard over a few weeks, and it was a few weeks of iteration until they trusted it, and they validated the results, so proved that it was testing the same way as their manual processes did, and it was that what landed it internally, and then they pressed the button and scaled it up from there. And that's where they then saw those results that we see on the screen there, like up to 95% coverage. The evaluation checks, like going from 900 a month to 6,000. I mean, that's incredible. And you would never be able to achieve that without bringing in an army of analysts to be able to handle that workload. So I think that's really impressive results. And it is just by running your QA parallel to your manual until you're ready during that proof of concept.
Because then you can see, can't you? Like very obviously, like if the AutoQA is scoring something quite differently to how you'd expect, you've got time. You haven't rolled this out across like thousands and thousands of interactions. You haven't amplified that noise. Like you're able to kind of run this pilot with a group of evaluators, a group of agents, get that feedback and loop it all back in.
Yeah, because I mean, bringing it back to the prompts and the guidelines, that historically those things have been written for a human, but now we're writing them for the machine, and it takes it very literal. So if you've got all of that buy-in and the agents are part of that process as well, they understand that if the evaluation isn't correct, they understand the reasons why. They can then provide their feedback, which then goes into that iteration process. So they're part of the rollout. And then when it does go live, you've got your champions right there at
I
the
was just
agent
about
level.
to say that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And when you've got champions that are, agent champions, they're gold because they'll spread the good word.
Exactly. Yeah, you've got people who can kind of fight the good fight with you because change management is hard, right? Like people like what they like, they're used to a system, and there can be a little bit of reticence around AutoQA and automation, in terms of, Big Brother, that kind of thing. But it doesn't have to be that way if you manage it.
Exactly, and I think on that point, giving the agents a voice, like a means to be able to highlight where things maybe haven't been, scored in the right way, um, that's equally as important because that will inform any sort of kind of tweaks to prompts or any kind of guidelines that need to be tightened up. Because although you've got a high level of accuracy in your testing, there's still always going to be sort of kind of little edge cases, and agents being able to have that voice and have that process to highlight those things, that just makes for a stronger program.
Sure. Okay, I know that has been a bit of a whistle stop whirlwind tour of how to manage a kind of auto QA migration. Great time now, guys, to get any questions in if you have them. While we're waiting, if anyone is typing, I will just say that at Evaluate, we do try and make this process as seamless and smooth as possible. We have dedicated people on hand whose job it is to take some of these headaches away. Chris has already called out Atik and Echo, our brilliant TSMs, and we have delivery teams and people like yourself, Chris, who are, product enablers and want to make sure that people are getting the best out of the platform from day one.
Yeah, exactly. Because this is the thing. I mean, it's yes, it's you're not in it alone. It's not a case of you get handed over the keys to this platform and you're just left to it. As you say, there's a whole team dedicated to that. And speaking from a kind of personal standpoint, I absolutely love the platform and I love the value that it brings. And it is excellent when you see, other people get the value from that and you see the differences that it makes to the entire business. Because if you think of the level of insight that you get that you didn't get before, it's brilliant to see, and that's like a nerd coming out here, but I love that.
It's like, of course, we're slightly biased, and we are going to say that, but genuinely, that I know is a very genuine sentiment from you, Chris. So we are almost at time. I will just say that everyone will get the recording and also a PDF summary of everything that we've spoken about. So hopefully, if any of you have been frantically making notes, then we'll be able to fill in the gaps with that PDF summary. Look out in your inboxes as well for a future program of events. So if you found this webinar useful, we'd love to see you at a future one as well, where we're diving much deeper on things like writing automated line items and what the teams look like in the future and so on. And Chris will be running a fair few of those, so I'm sure his face will start to become very, very familiar. Other than that, the last bit of housekeeping from me is a little survey will pop up just after this session. If you could give us some feedback, that would be amazing. We absolutely do take it all on board. You don't need to, fill in every single question if you've not got any kind of specific thoughts, but a rating out of 10 would be fabulous, and any other kind of qualitative feedback you want to give us. We genuinely do like reading them, good or bad, because it makes every future session much better. So we think we brought that in on time. Thank you so much for joining us for our last summer session. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of what remains of summer, and we will see you in the autumn with a new program of events. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Bye bye.